千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now. To be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process of the Tao. Previously, I mentioned that chapter 61 is a sequel of 60. They are connected thematically. That is, 61 continues the theme from 60, using country or kingdom as a metaphor for one's life. Knowing that is actually the first step to understanding this chapter. Otherwise, a lot of people will find it very confusing by all this talk about large country, small country, and their interactions and being low. What is all that? Well, let's begin our discussion with a recap of the chapter title in Chinese. So the first character, and the way that I have the characters here, is read from left to right. So the first character, just to reiterate, means to reside, occupied, or dwell. So this is where you place yourself. The middle character, the one in the middle, is lower, low, down, below. So the first two characters together means to reside at the lower place, to occupy a lower position. So translated here as dwell below. To dwell below is the Tao metaphor for staying humble, like water automatically flowing to and occupying the lowest place. So it's a humble disposition. In life, there's actually a lot of advantages to recognize the power of the lower position. It's a lower center of gravity, it's greater stability, it's also a position that is ready to explode into movement, like crouching down in order to jump. So keep that in mind. The lower position, the Tao Te Ching says, is what people despise. Why is that? It is because people like to occupy the high place where they can enjoy high profile and high visibility. So to occupy the high place is metaphoric for arrogance, for showcasing oneself, for flaunting one's own achievements. To occupy the low place is to be humble, is to not have an obsession to be seen. So that can be very valuable. Let's take a look at the chapter itself. So previously, we did our sectional analysis. We ended up with 3 sections. We found many repeating elements in the chapter. Some of the repeating elements, as you can see in this slide, they're highlighted in blue or purple. So the color coding helps you see the match. So the match sometimes will occur in a different position in the line. So in some cases, the beginning of a line can be the end of the previous line, signifying that it's a continuation of the same line of thought, same train of thought. With this diagram, I have also color-coded the corresponding translation, so you can see that better as far as where exactly the English is matching the Chinese. So with all that, how far did we get? Well, the answer is not very far. We got to the end of line 1. The large country is like the lowest river. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time with our recap today because we only talked about that one line. And here's a slide to recap what we discussed. So large country, that maps to the great person, and it can also map to someone who has the advantage or the edge or power in a particular relationship. And again, in life, the large country, small country distinction is often relative. So the example that I have used previously is that a mid-level manager is a large country to the rank and file, but is the small country compared to senior executives. Now, outside of the workplace, you can also think about how an adult is old, the large country compared to kids, but is not as experienced as the elderly, and therefore is the small country compared to them. It's the same person, it's only what they're relative to that determines whether they fall into the category of the large country or the small country. So back to this particular slide here, when we apply this whole idea to life, it can also be talking about nurturing others and sometimes leading others. And whether you are guiding, mentoring, nurturing, or leading, other people have goals that are aligned to yours. And if you aspire to be great in any of those roles, leading, guiding, mentoring, etc., you must be humble. You must be like the lowest river. And there is a whole lot of material associated with that we're going to get into in detail today. Bottom line here, it's not just about inspiring other people in a position of leadership. It's actually about humbly asking for their help. The distinction that the Tao provides is that it is not a sign of weakness. It is not beneath you to ask for help. Indeed, it's quite the opposite. It's a sign of your greatness. So there's a huge amount that we can talk about using different examples in life to bear that out. So this is what we talked about before. The metaphor to keep in mind as we look at this line and the rest of the lines in this chapter of the Tao Te Ching is that the visual is the small rivers flowing into a large river. The large river is receiving the inflow from the small rivers only because it is lower than they are positionally. That's how we can receive the water. The water is tribute, assets, good things, attention. So this large country, small country interaction is really just a reference to social situations where two sides interact. One side is on the receiving end, and the powerful one, the one that has positional advantage, is receiving attention from the ones that don't have the advantage. But this is not necessarily power as conventionally envisioned, because when you are in the lower position to receive from others, that is a sign of your greatness, but it also implies that you have obligations to those you lead. Let's get right into that. Let's go to the second line. As you can see in this slide, the second line says, the converging point of the world. When you are the lowest river, when you are the large country, you are the converging point. So what does that mean? Well, we'll start out by talking about the last character there, jiao. So in Mandarin, What that means is to cross over, to intersect, to meet, or join. So that's the usage in modern times. In the Tao Te Ching, in this ancient context, the meaning is similar, it's related. It means the point of convergence, where things come together. So the easiest way to think of it is, as I mentioned, all these smaller streams and creeks flowing with the water emptying into a larger river to be together in the current, the greater currents of the large river, flowing on its way to the ocean. The ocean, of course, is the lowest of the low, and that's how rivers can empty into it, and not vice versa. When we use this in the context of large and small countries, we're talking about how the large country becomes a central point. Now, in ancient China, they regarded themselves as large and powerful and a central point in the world. And this started out in primitive times, even before the flowering of ancient Chinese civilization. In primitive times, it was simply the central plain, 中原, that became a gathering spot at the point of convergence of the many tribes that lived during that time. And then later on, of course, towns, cities, villages sprang up, and some of them become larger and more powerful than the others. So in every historical era, powerful empires always become the central point for all the neighboring kingdoms or nations or states. So think about our common expression, all roads lead to Rome. This comes from ancient times when literally, because of the infrastructural work engaged done by the Roman Empire, there were many roads that led to Rome, and Rome was a gathering place. Rome was a center of civilization, center of commerce, trade. It was the place where different people from different places could all gather together. It was the point of convergence. And it was the same for ancient China. Ancient China, at the peak of its power, was also that central point of convergence. Even before Marco Polo exploring, having his adventures, even before his time, people from outlying regions visited China frequently. They, at the time, marveled at the achievement of this ancient civilization. So, in a similar way as the great countries today in the world gathering top talents from around the world, that happened too in ancient China. So in a way, you can sort of visualize that the people in outlying regions visiting these points of convergence, they bring benefits to the point of convergence. So we have some examples today. Of course, the modern world is more complex. So we have multiple points of convergence in modern times, depending on which aspect of life you're talking about. So some examples, some easy examples, when you think about the convergence point for technology, I think, one of the first things that can spring to mind is the Silicon Valley. So that is certainly recognized as a point of convergence in that regard, as far as digital technology, as far as the internet, startups, etc. What about other aspects of life? Well, if you think about movies in terms of entertainment, while people would automatically think about Hollywood as a central point of convergence. Now, of course, things change and evolve. So when you go to Hollywood today, you will see that much of it has been turned into a tourist attraction, and the actual centers of entertainment production is actually apart or close to, but not exactly at Hollywood. So look at other examples. Milan, Italy is considered to be a point of convergence for fashion. Now, it doesn't have to be just one single point of convergence. For example, there are 4 cities in the world that are considered to be, they're called the Big Four capital of fashion in the 21st century. And those 4 include Milan, but also include London, New York, and Paris. And of course, New York is identified as a center or a convergence point for culture and the arts. And there are many other examples as well. And we talked about Hollywood being a convergence point for entertainment in regards to movies. Well, Las Vegas, sometimes is called the center of convergence for entertainment, but that is in respect to gambling. So examples go on and on. They cover all different areas of life. But now I think you get the context that this is used in the original 道德经. So let's talk about this a little bit more. There's this reference to the female. Line 3 says the receptive female of the world. So this requires some explanation. You know, what is it talking about? What does it mean? What is it referring to? So we have a character here that pin that is no longer used in modern Mandarin. Not commonly used. It's used frequently in ancient texts, but not in modern times. The literal meaning of that is female. Here, though, it does not literally mean female of the species. It is a reference to the yin principle. Now, the yin principle can exist in men or women, and in fact, you cannot be without it no matter which gender you happen to be. Whether you are a man or woman, there's the yin principle within that you must wield. There's no such thing as a pure yang person, someone that is only the male principle and not the female. Everybody is a balance between the two principles. So specifically, the yin principle refers to a receptive, receiving state. It is easy to see when you think about the metaphor of the river, because the large river, in getting the water from the tributaries, like streams, like brooks, creeks, it is the receiving end of that water, and therefore it, of course, is receptive. That's in accordance with the yin principle. Now, in the Tao, the yin principle is also the soft and gentle approach. And there's going to be more references to this beyond just receiving water. So there is a whole lot more discussions about that. So moving on, let's take the line together to assess the overall meaning, the receptive female of the world. So to be the receptive female has multiple layers of meaning. We've already talked about the lowest river is on the receiving end, and therefore it is in accordance with the yin principle. I think that's clear. How does this apply to the largest country being the lowest river? Well, the large country, using the yin principle, would treat small countries with courtesy. The principle says the ruler of the large country, the king of the large kingdom, has every reason to treat smaller countries with courtesy and goodwill. Over time, this has the positive effect of making the large country even more powerful. We'll see how that works in just a moment. Let's go ahead and bring up that bullet. And then in diplomacy, what this means is a policy of international partnership. When you treat smaller countries as equals, you are treating them as if they are equal partners. This doesn't detract from the fact that the large country is much more powerful than the small country. So international partnership means cooperation, collaboration, and assistance rather than domination. It would be easy for a large empire to dominate small countries. But in accordance with the Tao, by following the Tao, it may seem a little bit counterintuitive, but over time, it makes the large country more powerful, not less. Therefore, the Tao is to be receptive, go with the flow, let the convergence continue on. And if you think about the expression, the American dream, right behind it, behind the phrase American dream, is the convergence principle. That is, let the people come, let them be at their best, let them pursue their dreams of happiness, let them excel on their own in that pursuit. So that would be in accordance with the Tao if it is followed in the spirit of that principle. What would be against the Tao then? Well, intimidation, domination, interference in the internal affairs of the smaller country to loot their resources. So you can already see in world events that there's no shortage of that going on today. So as I frequently say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. The Tao Te Ching is relevant today only because it's talking about timeless principles. It is talking about human nature, and that hasn't changed significantly in thousands of years. Human beings are still human beings with all of our aspirations, phenomenal achievements, but also our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities, our fears that lead to that type of intimidation and domination. So anyhow, I thought that I can illustrate these ideas with some graphs, with some pictures that can be better than 1,000 words. So let me share this picture with everyone here. As you can see, I have a simplistic diagram showing a large country at the bottom and then small countries above it. I position it this way instead of having the large country above, because this is how Lao Tzu sees it in his mind. That if you think of the large country as a large river flowing, and then small countries are the streams that flow in from the mountains. The large country may be that large river in the center of the valley. So around the valley, streams, smaller rivers, tributaries are at a higher position, so the water in them flows into the river. So this is all done in blue to kind of make that point. Think of it as the flow of water. So when you apply this to the interaction of countries, or the ancient times, kingdoms, and small kingdoms with large empires, what would that entail? Well, often it would be paying tribute. The small country will be paying tributes to the large country. Historically, powerful empires, including ancient China, played the role of protector, the large country in international geopolitical power dynamics. For the smaller kingdoms in the outlying region, it starts out at the basic level of survival. Small countries become vassal states, client states, beholden to the larger, much more powerful empire. So they come to the capital, bearing gifts, making friendly overtures, seeking diplomatic ties, emphasizing goodwill and mutually beneficial relationships. What are they looking for? Well, they want an alliance. In an alliance between the small country and the big country, the smaller one benefits greatly by being protected by the large country. If there is already an alliance, the small country will be visiting to affirm its allegiance, to swear allegiance to the emperor. And in some cases, if there's an alliance in place, the small country will be coming to the large country requesting protection. You know, it's a request, for instance, to the emperor that the small kingdom is having border conflicts and can use some help from the much more powerful military of the larger empire. What else? Well, in times of peace, not warfare, there can be cultural exchange. In ancient times, this would just be a term meaning that the smaller countries will be coming to the large country, the center of civilization, to learn the way that the empire's infrastructures are built, to learn new technology, to bring back to the outlying regions, to learn what they can of the culture, the literature, to bring those back as education for the people in the smaller kingdom. So cultural exchange, basically learning, discovery for the small kingdoms. Then, finally, there's also the establishing of trade agreements, trade routes, commerce. This is what is going to enable the small country to prosper by engaging in profitable trade with the large country. The large country is the large economic base, the consumers. If there are things that the small country can offer that are rare in the large country, then profitability is a definite possibility. So because of this, you can now see exactly why Lao Tzu says that the large country is the converging point, the point of convergence, because it is where these small countries are coming into. And you can also see why the large country is the receptive female, or the yin principle. It is receiving all these overtures and attention, visits from smaller countries. So that's exactly what it means. Now let's move on. So there's a little bit more to this that we should talk about. Here's the central question. Here's the most important question for all of us. We talk about this every time we go through these lines, and the question is, how do we apply this to life? Okay, it's great that we see these lines reflecting historical patterns of the interactions between kingdoms, great and small. That's fine and dandy. How do I use this? How can I benefit from this particular teaching? So one thing that it implies is that the great person, the large country, the one with power, the one with the advantage, has to use the soft approach, the yin principle, the gentle touch. And the great person, he or she will be receptive, ready to listen. That's also what it means to be the receptive female. The yin principle is receptive. So sages Real sages of the Tao practice this principle constantly. They are using the soft and gentle touch. So it's not the tough sergeant that is barking orders at the recruits, at the military recruits. It is the guidance, the mentoring, the tips, the suggestions, not commands, not ordering people around. It's the soft touch. And the sages are receptive, ready to listen. If you have a problem, they'll listen to you. They'll try to help you resolve that issue with some guidance by nudging you in the right direction. So these are the reasons. These two bullets are the reasons why people are drawn to a sage. It makes sense. Who would not want a person of wisdom to be able to go to be able to help you with the soft approach? So it definitely applies to life. On the part of the sage, there is no intimidation or interference. There is nothing that will be contrary to the Tao. And this is why, I talked about how the ruler of a large country has every reason to treat smaller countries with courtesy and goodwill, which in turn attracts the smaller countries to the large country. So it's all kind of coming together. When we apply this to life, it all starts with dwelling low, being humble. So I want to use that graph that you just saw on the relationship between the large country and the smaller countries. I want to use that and apply it to you. As I mentioned previously, when it comes to life, large country and small countries, that's a relative term. Sometimes you are the large, sometimes you are the small. Now, everybody has opportunities to be the large country. That is, when you go out there in the world and you are the customer or the client for a particular service. So we have expressions like the customer is king or the customer is always right. So in that context, in that situation, in that interaction, you are the large country. And you will be occupying the position below, while the providers of services, the shopkeepers, the people who wait on you, they will be above that position, in the position of the smaller countries. Let's work through one example. These are all done in generic terms, so they can apply to everyday situations. They can be applied to experiences that you've had in life. So think about you as the customer, and you are about to do some business. So one thing that you may want to do starting out is that you're getting out of the house, you need transportation. So you need a service, and the service provider in this case will be the driver. So let's just talk about this as a generic term. And I know that sometimes people will drive themselves from one place to another. This is talking about a situation when you have someone who provides transportation service to you. So driver is really just a generic term. Nowadays, it can be a taxi driver, perhaps your Uber driver, bus driver, train conductor, plane pilot. So anyone who is providing you the service to get you from one place to another, that becomes like a small country, and you are the large country receiving the service. Their service is their tribute, is the water flowing from them to you. So you've gotten the transportation service, you've gotten to the place where you want to be. The next person that you encounter, also a generic term, is going to be reception. This could mean the doorman, the security guard, receptionist, concierge, bellhop, the gatekeeper. It's the person whoever that is, this is the person who provides the service of greeting you and providing you with access. So again, you are the large country, and the reception person is the small country. Then the reception person, perhaps secretary, perhaps administrative assistant, can also be providing the service of coordination. That is, get you coordinated to meet the person that you are coming to see. And that's the provider of the assistance that you're looking for. By now, you know this is also a generic term because this could be pointing to a doctor when you have a medical appointment. This could be an attorney when you have an appointment to talk about legal matters. This could be the hairdresser. This could be the shopkeeper. This could be anyone who provides you with some kind of service. And it could be someone who's providing a service in terms of consultation. When you are going somewhere to see the fortune teller, that is a service provided to you in the form of consultation. So then what else? Well, there are so many different services that the assistance provider can be providing to you. I'll just use a generic term here as well, various services. And I'll leave it up to you to think about all the different kinds of services that you could be wanting. And the endless varieties, there's the pet grooming services, pet walking, there's cleaning services, there's all kinds of stuff. And you get sort of the idea. You can see, you can begin to get the picture that just like the large country is the convergence point for the small countries, you as the customer, you are the convergence point for all the different people, different roles that provide you with some kind of service. Indeed, when you are done meeting the service provider, the assistance provider with the various services, you may be wanting to take a break. You may be walking into a cafe or restaurant. Then, of course, you've got someone to take your orders. So I'm using the term waiter here in a generic sense as well. In a street side stand, the waiter is also the person who's cooking the food, of course. But you are nevertheless the point of convergence for the service that's being provided by that person as well, food and drinks. Now you can see that it is still true for you. You're the point of convergence. You're at the receiving end. You are the large country. So I think that makes it quite clear the correspondence between the ancient text and modern life. There are so many times when I see people trying to figure out this chapter, like what is all this talk about large countries and small countries? Is it relevant to me in life? As you can see in the slide, it is very relevant to you living your life. Indeed, so relevant that I want to specifically have a slide devoted to it, the Tao applied to life. The first thing to note, as I said, is that relationship dynamics constantly change. Sometimes you're the large country. For instance, when you play the role of parent, supervisor, or as we have just seen, the customer or the client, you're the large country. Other times, you are the small country. You may be the child to your elderly parent. You may be the worker to your supervisor. You may be someone who provides service to customers or clients. So dynamics constantly change. At this point so far in the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu is making the point of what happens when you play the role of the large country. So always be open and receptive to alternative opinions. So this would be in the context of, for instance, the supervisor or the parent. You may not see everything that's relevant to a situation. You should be the lowest river, receiving from smaller rivers upstream, incorporating their ideas and thoughts into your own plans of action. The other factor is that you want to always be courteous to provide to those who provide service to you. So this is taking from what Lao Tzu says, that the large country should be treating the smaller countries with courtesy from the perspective of humility, a humble approach. So we're talking about in modern life, could be the wait staff, could be the cleaning crew, the security guard. The list goes on and on. So always be courteous to them, and always keep convergence and receptivity in mind when you play that role. This is not just about being the supervisor or parent or customer. This is whenever in a social situation you have some form of privilege. A privilege in a social setting, an advantage, an edge. So what would be against the Tao or contrary to the Tao? Well, as we talked about, it would be intimidation or domination. It would be acting in an aggressive, commanding ways against those who play the role of the small country. Because when you do that, you are forgetting the very first line of the slide, that relationship dynamics constantly change. You are forgetting you also play the role of a small country from time to time. So this is where we are concluding our discussion to the topic. You just have to remember that the service being provided by the small country or the service providers, that is their tribute to the large country. When you're in the position of a large country, you're receiving from them, and you want to express your appreciation to them. So on that note, it is time for us to take a 5-minute break. Line 4 says the female always overcomes the male with serenity. So remember, female here is the yin principle. Always overcomes the male. The male here means the yang principle, the active principle. Now this is a recurring theme in the Tao Te Ching. The soft overcomes the hard. And this is, let me just reiterate, because this is important. This is not about women versus men, not about female yin versus the male. It's about the observation from the ancient sages that the yin principle overcomes the yang principle in time. This is what the sages have observed in nature. Yin principle wins in the end. It is very important for me to point out that in the Tao Te Ching, there is no male-female equality. There is only the eventual victory of the yin principle. The overriding power of the Tao is the power of water to dissolve everything. Therefore, the Tao Te Ching speaks to the mystic female and never the mystic male. Why is that? Why were the ancient masters so politically incorrect? Well, they were not politically incorrect. They merely observe that in life, it is always the women and children who must be preserved, protected, defended. It is always the men, since primitive times, who have been expendable. That's just the way reality operates. Women are central in the family. They may not be highly visible in society in ancient China, but regardless of ancient times or modern times, women have always been the foundation of society, even when they are just working in the home as the center of family. So it is important for us to recognize that the intention of Lao Tzu was to describe reality accurately. He had no thoughts to pander to any particular perspective. He just wanted to be accurate. So from his perspective, the observation is that yang, the male energy, can be loud and explosive and violent, but it's all in the short term. In the long run, it is yin, the female essence, that will eventually overcome. In that long run, it is quietness, serenity, peace that will eventually prevail long after the temporary manifestations of the male energy have faded away. So then, also important to note that this is an idea that applies to nations. In ancient times, modern times, it's an idea that applies to people. And again, ancient times and modern times, therefore, we have to apply this idea to our lives. And that just means we want to be open and receptive. That receptive frame of mind is especially important when you are in an advantageous position. And as I mentioned, always be courteous to all, especially those who provide services to you. And always keep convergence and receptivity in mind as the large country, being the supervisor, having privilege, and never engage in intimidation or domination or aggression. Anyhow, let's move on to the next line. Next line says, using serenity as the lower position. Let's dissect that. Let's analyze and see the meaning associated with it. Now, in our Western mindset, some may assume a lower position is a disadvantage. As I mentioned in the beginning of our discussion today, in the Tao, it's quite the opposite. The lower position is the source of power. So I want to talk about some examples, including some that we have already discussed. We talked about the ocean, the vast great ocean, being the lowest of the low compared to rivers that flow into it and the mountain streams that flow into the river. So the greatness of the ocean is due to the lowest position, as I mentioned. And then the large country wants to learn from that. In the home, the large country will be the center of power, which in many families is the mother. So then let's go ahead and put that into bullets. For the large country, the lower position receives tributes from the smaller countries. And I mentioned crouching down in order to jump high or jump far. Well, for the athlete, the lower position powers a jump. So for the individual, the lower position is the humility of greatness. You are truly great when you are truly humble. So now I don't want to dismiss Yang principle. It is important, even though yin eventually wins, eventually is the one that lasts, yang principle is something that we should also pay attention to. So then we can see, as an example, water cutting through rocks. So we see this in nature everywhere. In time, water dissolves everything, no matter what that is. And then we know that water can take some time, perhaps centuries, perhaps thousands of years, to wear through rocks. So time, in that context, is the way that it is perceived in the Tao, because the Tao is eternal. Even centuries and thousands of years would be like an instant from the perspective of the Tao. When we apply this to life with the time as an element, then we can see victory belongs to those who go the distance. Can you outlast everyone else? If so, victory belongs to you. Then the soft overcomes the hard, the recurring idea in the Tao Te Ching. This is something that Tao cultivators take to heart. Tao cultivators always use the yin principle skillfully. This is because redirecting force is always better than head-on collision. And you can see this in the graceful movements of Tai Chi. When people are performing the circular movements, that is actually practice in channeling and redirecting external incoming force. Now, to be receptive, as I mentioned, is to listen and think about this situation. We have all seen it or experienced it in our lives. That is when contention occurs, when people have this exchange and it becomes heated, it heats up into an argument, and then before you know it, it's an outright fight. So when exchange becomes heated, the wise person chooses to remain calm. That is, the wise person is using the yin principle, the receptive female, to overcome the explosion of violent rhetoric with serenity. So that calmness, in other words, is using serenity to overcome the aggressive attack. The aggressive attack belongs to the yang principle. Now, we've all seen this. We've seen how one can lose control, explode in anger, and make all kinds of mistakes leading to one's own defeats. So, in a way, you can say that the yang principle tends to defeat itself. The yin principle will wait that out and then be the one who remains standing. So this happens in life, in many different situations where yang principle is explosive but runs out of gas, runs out of energy. The yin principle remains quiet, keeps its strength. So when yang energy is completely exhausted, the yin energy is still strong. And that's how the eventual victory is accomplished in a human interaction scenario. So now let's go to the next line. We're back to the large country, small country again. I think everybody understood the first part of this chapter. I think all these different examples from life, because we have all experienced it, they are very easy to identify with. So now, line 6. Line 6 says, thus, if the large country is lower than the small country, in other words, in a position to receive, being humble, in the Tao, to dwell at the low place, like water flowing to the low place, is to be humble. humble like water, the humble approach. So then we know that the large country has a much more powerful military, has a lot of resources. Nevertheless, it dwells in the low place, which in this context means to be courteous and welcoming of the small country. So despite being more powerful, the large country should treat the small country as an equal. That's the treatment as opposed to the objective reality. Objective reality is that the two countries are not equals, but despite that, the treatment from the large country to the small is the respectful treatment of an equal. This does not diminish the status of greatness on the part of the large country. Quite the opposite. This is how the large country wins respect and admiration. So to kind of summarize, the way to attain harmony in interactions, not just for the large country, but for us as well, it's always the humble approach. And the humble approach is something that will be reciprocated eventually by all sides. But the large country is the one that initiates the exchange because the large country sets the tone of the interaction. And to be welcoming in a real life situation for you and me, it just means a positive greeting, a polite inquiry. So then in that human interaction that you and I are engaged in, the nonverbal cues are just as important. It's the expression, it's the smile, it's the phrase, may I help you? So a lot goes into that. A little bit more in just a moment. For now, I want to go to line 7. Okay, line 7 says, then it can take the small country. The large country can take the small country. It is important for me to focus on the word take because in this context, take does not mean conquest. It doesn't mean that the large country conquers the smaller one. Instead, it does just the opposite. You know, when we talked about treating the smaller country as an equal, to be respectful, even though it has the ability to conquer the smaller country, well, the small country is aware of that. The smaller country knows it cannot possibly go against the large country with its powerful military and a lot more resources. It is therefore natural that the smaller country will feel apprehensive, uncertain, a little bit nervous in approaching the large country. The large country then has an opportunity to set the smaller country at ease by being nice and polite. The large country can win over the small country by not being domineering and arrogant. So I think that makes sense for everyone. This has the effect of turning the small country into a loyal ally. So that interactional dynamic we can use in life as well. So again, let's turn our attention to life. How can I use this? How can I use this not just for myself, but also to understand what is going on in life? How can I use it to help me understand what I observe all around me? Well, in the subject of leadership, in our world, one example of the large country is the boss. And I'll use the term business leader. The wise business leader knows this Tao principle, may not call it that, may not call it the Tao, but the wise business leader knows this sometimes intuitively, sometimes learned from books or learned from other great business leaders. And what is this principle? Well, just being humble. Being humble in this case means treating everyone as an equal, regardless of their position in the company hierarchy. Absolutely everyone. That you don't end up treating those who are lower on the totem pole differently than those who are high up. What about being receptive? Well, in this case, to be receptive means listening to the people, listening to everyone, that you are not picking and choosing to only hear the opinions you want to hear, that you can learn much, much more by paying attention to contrary opinions or from the opinions expressed in the lower ranks. By doing so, by treating everyone as an equal and by being willing to listen, open door policy, this does not diminish the leader's status in any way. Just like the gentle touch, the welcoming courtesies of the large country does not diminish the greatness of the large country in any way. Quite the contrary. It enhances the business leader's prestige, and it also inspires loyalty. So here, I want to use this graphic of the handshake here. It's denoting a partnership between management and employees. Now, the same paradigm applies in all different settings. For instance, in the home, the parent is the large country. So being humble in this case means never assuming you must be right, that other valid opinions can exist. Being receptive in this case means you are willing to hear what your child has to say, that you don't dismiss your children's opinions outright. To do so does not diminish the parent's authority in any way. Quite the contrary, it will only increase the love in the family. Now you can see how the same bullet points here with slight modifications applies to an arena completely different and separate from the workplace. So let's go back to the lines. Line 8. So this is where a lot of confusion can be for many people who study the Tao Te Ching without guidance. It says if the small country is lower than the large country, and here the students, the Western student may say, well, wait a minute, we just got done talking about the large country being lower. What are you talking about? The small country is lower than the large country. Who's actually lower? It can be confusing. Here, lower is constant in meaning. It just means humility. It means humility for the large country. It means humility for the small country. Now, let's put it in these terms that are easier to understand. The small country is respectful in dealing with and approaching the large country. Why respect? Well, the large country, the reality is the large country already has many client states and protectorates. The small country needs the large country, but not necessarily the other way around. The large country does not need a small country. Therefore, the small country, it is in its best interest to present itself in the best possible light, because it is aware that the power dynamics is unequal for both sides. And that means the humble approach provides the best chance of acceptance. I think that makes sense for everyone. I think it'll resolve the confusion that some people may have reading these lines, perhaps for the first time. Okay, now in line 9, it says it can be taken by the large country. So the character for take here is translated as taken. It means to be included in the circle of trust for the large country. Now, it's the same character that was translated as to take, here translated as taken. This is because ancient Chinese and modern Mandarin are the same in being heavily contextual. There's no different forms for the verb. So take and taken will be the same character. There's no singular or plural. So many people, one person will be the same character. It would depend on the context around it to give it the exact English equivalent. Now here, let's talk about this idea of being included, being taken, meaning being included. Well, the small country can win recognition from the large country, and further diplomacy can then lead to many benefits for the small country. This means treaties, trade agreements, mutually beneficial relationships, cultural exchange, etc. Again, we want to apply this to life because the microcosm of the personal reflects the macrocosm of the national. What is true for the small and large country is also true for us. The principles that worked well for the ancient kingdoms work equally well to us. So then you can easily imagine that when the small country is certain of the large country's intention, peaceful exchange, not domination, it can then relax. It can then play its part in a harmonious relationship. So let's be more specific to that as it applies to life. We always want to apply these ideas to life. So we previously talked about leadership, the boss, the business leader. Let's look at it from another angle, service. Now, this is especially important to us because many countries of the world, including us, have transitioned from manufacturing to the service industry. And that's why I mentioned a moment ago that customer is king, customer is always right. Nowadays, there's reviews that people rely upon to assess service quality. So in our world, one example of the small country is a service provider. We all have opportunities to provide service to other people. So the wise professional in the service industry understands the Tao intuitively, may not have studied the Tao, but understands the importance of providing excellence in service. So being humble in this case means providing great service with the right attitude. Service with a smile is our often heard expression. What about being receptive? For the business leader, it's the open door policy to be willing to listen to everybody in the company hierarchy. For the service provider, to be receptive means listening to the customer or client. Now, that may seem obvious, but my own experience in the business world is that it is still relatively rare. So for instance, there is going to be times when I send out an email for business, and then judging by the reply that I get, I know the other person has not read it. They are asking the question that's already being answered in the email that I sent. So listening to the customer or client may not be as common as one would assume. Now, to be humble and receptive on the part of the service provider, it does not diminish the professional status in any way. Indeed, it's quite the contrary. Just like it is for the business leader, for the service provider, it too can enhance reputation and inspire loyalty. Loyalty from whom? The customer or the client. So I want to use the same graphic here, but it's in a different context. The context here is not a partnership between management and employees. Rather, it is the completion of a deal, the conclusion of service provided. It's an expression of appreciation. Now, the handshake can mean many different things. There is another context we'll talk about later, and that is conflict resolution. So now we're going to return to the lines. We are now on line 10. Thus, one uses the lower position to take. What does that mean? One, in this context, is the large country. The large country uses the lower position, the humble approach, the welcoming, the soft touch, to take, meaning to win over the small country. So let's dissect that. For both the large country and the small country, the Tao of humility is used for both, but in different ways. Different ways, different reasons, different outcomes. The large country is using the humble approach to win the hearts and minds of the small country. Let's think about what that means in our application of the Tao today. As we live our lives, in any given situation, the large country is the side with power, with advantage, with the edge. So using the humble approach, such a person, the side with power, can win people over quite easily. It's not just in direct contact, in direct interaction, but also because word of mouth spreads. It can be done indirectly, winning people over through reputation. So think about how when the large country is being gracious, it's demonstrating generosity. In a real life situation, when the more powerful person in an exchange is gracious, he or she shows class. Let's move on to the other perspective. The other uses the lower position to be taken. The other, in this case, is talking about the small country. The small country also uses the humble approach, but for a different reason, with a different outcome. The objective of the small country is to win acceptance and recognition, to be able to tap into the large country's resources and influence. How would that map to the modern world? So we talked about being the service provider. So let's go back. The small country can be the person providing service. So using the humble approach, you can win customers over. And it's similar in that it's not just in direct contact, but also indirectly through reputation. You can gain a lot of business through word of mouth, through high ratings on websites, positive reviews, glowing reviews, rave reviews. These become increasingly powerful for us because we are increasingly aligning with the Tao. We see more and more how accurate Lao Tzu was 2,500 years ago. Okay, so we want to now talk about specifically the goal and intention of the large country versus the small country. Line 12 says the large country only wishes to gather and protect people. Because you have now seen the large country mapped to different roles in life, you can now understand exactly where Lao Tzu was going with this. The large country becomes ever more powerful by taking more small countries under its wings. Therefore, by being gracious, You can demonstrate generosity. And the small country will then do their share to contribute to the greatness of the large country. And that goes back to the first bullet. It becomes ever more powerful. So in real life, when the boss is gracious, he or she demonstrates class. This tends to result in workers becoming productive and happy. So this is not to necessarily say that everyone who is listening to this will be the boss. It is also to say that when you observe something working right, you can reference this and figure out why that is. If it is congruent with the Tao, it's going to result in excellence, prosperity, happiness. Let's look at the small country perspective. It's different for the small country. For the small country, it can be a matter of survival to use the humble approach. The small country protects itself by being accepted into the trusted circle of the large country. Acceptance is the starting point in being able to benefit from diplomacy. And then let's talk about real life. This is the service provider demonstrating appreciation. Appreciation for what? Appreciation for the business. Thank you for the business. This will be reciprocated by the large country, the customer, with repeat business and also referrals. The business referrals plus the repeat business means prosperity for the service provider. It means recognition for the excellence in service, and the customer and the referred customers also gain someone who is going to do a great job. Therefore, the Tao is present. Peace and prosperity prevail for everyone. So this distinction between the large country and the small country, we'll talk about again next time. For now, we are now getting close to the end of our time together today, so we're going to need to go to the summary to summarize what we talked about today. So previously, part 1 of the summary is about the large country. So I'll run through them again because previously we only had one line. The large country is the lowest river. This time we've gone through the characteristics, the behavior, the mindsets, the intention, the goals, objectives of the large country in great detail. So these bullet points will make a lot more sense. Starting with the lowest river. So the larger the country, the lower the river, the greater your aspiration, the more humble you must be. Today, we talked about the large country being the point of convergence. Let's talk about that in the summary. Being the point of convergence in life for you and me, it just means it isn't just about you. Life was never meant to be a one-person show. It's you plus everybody around you. This means you want to harness and synergize the power of the team. And you may say, well, what if I don't have a team? Well, when I say team, I'm using the term in a general sense. Feel free to substitute the word group. The power of the group, your group of friends, group of acquaintances, group of allies. Or you can use the term family. Synergize the power of the family. Or generally speaking, synergize the power of the people, your friends. And lastly, with a large country, it's about the soft approach. It costs nothing to be kind. It actually wins you everything. That is sort of a contrary approach. A lot of people, when they have a position of power, will leverage that power to dominate others. It doesn't make them stronger, quite the opposite. It'll make them weaker. So in the Tao, it is always about being kind and compassionate. That's where real power can be derived from, real spiritual power. That's the summary on the large country. Let's talk about the summary for the small country, because we talked about the small country quite a bit today. All the examples on providing service, customer interactions with the service provider, etc. It's all bearing on the small country, 小国. So what can we say about that? Well, the small country benefits greatly from the humble approach. It's about using courtesy and genuine respect when you come into contact with other people. And this has the effect of winning people over because, let's be frank, good service is hard to find. And that means this principle will easily elevate you head and shoulders above the competition, above pretty much everyone else. Good service is hard to find. Then, this leads to effortless excellence. And here, I want to make an important point. When you are able to utilize the Tao, the humble approach, the soft touch, winning people over, etc., it is a key to success. With this key to success, the small country service provider eventually becomes the large country. That is, you gain in power. So you may start out as a low-level service clerk in an organization. If you are able to tap into the Tao, utilize that to your own benefit, you rise in the ranks, promotion, recognition, until eventually you become a senior executive. You become the large country. In the ancient context of kingdoms, the small country, when it utilizes the Tao, becomes more prosperous and ever more powerful. It has a good chance of becoming a large country as well. So this is all about gaining spiritual power that in turn contributes to the quality of your life. Lastly, not in the summary, but there is a point that I want to give you as a preview that we're going to talk about quite a bit next time, because I get this question all the time. Well, what if you can't tell in a situation, in a given situation, which side is a large country and which side is the smaller country? Now, I'm going to give you a critic response, and then next time I will explain exactly why that is. If you aren't sure which side is the large country, you are the large country. The uncertainty guarantees that you are and must be the large country. I will explain why next time. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.